Evelyn Carter stood alone beneath the sycamore tree in the backyard, the same one James had planted the year they moved in. Its leaves, half golden, half fallen, rustled faintly in the November wind. The last guests had driven away, leaving behind folding chairs, half-empty paper cups, and the scent of lilies clinging to the air like smoke. No one had asked if she needed a ride home, not even Vanessa. Vanessa Carter, her daughter-in-law, executor of everything Nomad, arranged the entire funeral with impeccable precision. From the framed slideshow of James's achievements to the calligraphed name cards and uniform coffee cups, every detail had been selected and timed down to the minute. It was cold, polished, and painfully efficient. James would have hated it. He used to say funerals should be messy, should leave mascara streaks and coffee stains and too loud laughter between sobs. He wanted people to cry hard, hug harder, tell stories they half remembered. But this was a PowerPoint presentation of grief, sanitized and silent. When Evelyn stepped back inside the house, the air felt sharper than the wind. Vanessa was already stacking folders from the dining room table, her fingers moving with machine-like speed. Evelyn cleared her throat softly, unsure whether to speak. Without turning, Vanessa said, "We'll be moving forward with the legal processing next week. I've scheduled everything with the firm." There was no, "How are you holding up?" No, "Do you need anything?" No recognition that Evelyn had spent the last 6 months sleeping upright in an oncology chair while Vanessa flew to conferences and gave speeches about innovation. Evelyn wanted to believe it was just grief, or stress, or a generational failure of empathy. But then Vanessa handed her a small white box. "He asked me to give you this." Inside was a silver tie clip. Smooth, cool metal, plain. James had owned dozens of them. This one wasn't special. Not the one she gave him on their 20th anniversary. Not the one he wore to their son's wedding. Just one of many. No note, no letter, no last words. Vanessa offered a professional smile Evelyn had seen her use on donors, and photographer's hand walked away. Like that was the end of it. Like she had closed the book on 43 years of shared life with a single paperclip of metal. That night, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, a mug of tea turning lukewarm between her hands. The house was silent, too silent. James's cane still leaned against the back door. His jacket still hung in the hallway, his slippers still under the armchair he'd refused to replace. But Evelyn could feel it in her bone. She was no longer part of the picture. She wasn't grieving a man anymore. She was grieving an erasure. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe this was just how the world moved forward without asking permission. But as she sat there staring into the shadows of a home built on decades of shared breath and borrowed time, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. It wasn't grief, not entirely. It was the cold breath of betrayal. 3 days after the funeral, Evelyn received an email. The subject line read plainly, "Estate Administration Meeting, confirmed." No condolences, no message, just a location downtown, a date, and a time sent, not even by Vanessa, but her assistant. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment. She wasn't sure whether to feel insulted or invisible, perhaps both. That morning, she left home early, yet traffic made her 5 minutes late. Twice along the way, she almost turned around, but she didn't. The law office was sleek, sterile white marble floors and walls of glass. A faint scent of eucalyptus lingered in the air, mixed with fresh toner. At reception, a young woman greeted her with a look that betrayed quiet surprise. Evelyn smoothed down her coat and followed the intern down the hall. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Around the long table sat 7 people in charcoal suits. At the head of the table was Vanessa, her posture impeccable, her hair pulled into a perfect bun. She didn't rise. She didn't greet Evelyn, just nodded faintly, gesturing toward the only empty chair at the far end, away from the folders, away from the coffee. Evelyn took her seat. No one offered her a pen. No one offered her a packet. Vanessa began. "As executor of Dr. Carter's estate," she said, "I will walk us through the distribution of assets outlined in the final will." Her voice was calm, professional. as if she were leading a quarterly business review. She listed assets one by one: stock portfolios, 2 commercial properties in Salem, partial ownership of a winery James had invested in with colleagues. Then came the moment Evelyn would never forget. Primary control of the Carter family trust was transferred to me 6 months ago. Evelyn blinked. 6 months ago, James was still alive, still breathing, still battling for his life. She had been at his side every day, managing the trust with him for over 20 years. He had never mentioned a transfer, never even hinted. The room fell quiet as Vanessa continued without pause. Evelyn's name was not spoken, not even once. It wasn't until a young associate near the corner asked, "And Mrs. Carter's share?" Vanessa didn't flinch. There are no remaining distributions assigned to her under the current filing. Just like that, no explanation, no remorse, a surgical erasure. A heat rose slowly along Evelyn's spine, but she didn't move, didn't blink. She folded her hands in her lap and listened as the meeting moved on, as if she were a bystander, a ghost. When it ended, she didn't rush out. She waited, letting the room empty. Vanessa packed her briefcase slowly, deliberately. Evelyn stood, adjusted her scarf, and walked out, head held steady. Outside, the winter air slapped her cheeks. She welcomed it. The cold was sharp, real, not like the performance she had just endured. There were no tears, only silence, and something deeper beneath it. Something awakening. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She wandered through the darkened halls of the house, fingers brushing along the door frames, pausing by James's old study. The door creaked faintly as she pushed it open. The room still smelled like him tobacco and pine oil, a trace of his cologne lingering in the fabric of the chair. She sat down behind his desk. It wasn't so much a conscious decision, but more of an instinct, something she had done so many times before. It felt almost automatic. Her hands moved without hesitation, guided by memory rather than thought. The familiar motion of her fingers sliding across the desk brought a quiet comfort. She reached for the bottom drawer, the one that had always resisted being opened. As her fingers grasped the cool metal handle, the drawer groaned in protest. The sound was the same as always, a low, creaky groan that seemed to echo through the stillness of the room. James used to joke about it, saying the drawer was stubborn, like it had a mind of its own. He would laugh and tug at it, calling it the drawer that fights back. Evelyn had always smiled at his humor, responding with a quiet, playful remark of her own. "Let it squeak," she'd say. "That way I know you're home." The sound had always meant something more to her than just a noise. It had been a small, comforting reminder of the life they had shared, of the familiarity of their home, and the rhythm of their days. But today, as the drawer finally gave way, she felt no comfort, just the weight of the moment. She pulled it open, the old wood resisting for a second longer before yielding. Inside, as expected, were the remnants of their past-hold receipts, some yellowed and curling at the edges, a broken fountain pen that hadn't worked in years, and a photograph of their son from when he was just a child, smiling shyly in front of a birthday cake. The picture had been tucked carefully between the pages of a long-forgotten book, a simple snapshot of happier times. And then, deep in the back of the drawer, nestled beneath a ledger that had long ago lost its purpose, Evelyn felt something that wasn't part of the usual clutter. It was a folder plane, unmarked and inconspicuous. The manila folder stood out in stark contrast to the other items, its simplicity almost jarring in the midst of the forgotten mementos. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing over its edges as a sense of unease crept up her spine. Without thinking, she lifted it from its resting place, the weight of it unexpected, heavy in her hands. No label, no date. She opened it. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first was written in James' unmistakable handwriting, though shakier than she remembered. It wasn't a letter, it was a note, a confession in ink. "Vanessa wants me to revise the will, says it needs clarity. I ask her why now. She said it's standard, but she's too careful, too precise. She's drafting things on my behalf. I haven't signed anything, haven't told Evelyn. She'd asked the questions I'm afraid to answer. Evelyn's breath caught. Her fingers trembled slightly. The second page was a printed copy of a will Evelyn had never seen. It matched the one Vanessa had read aloud, but there were red ink markings in the margins, edits, circles, lines drawn through paragraphs. One sentence stood out: I leave my personal assets, including the residence, trust access, and designated accounts, to my wife, Evelyn Carter. It had been crossed out. In the margin, discuss with Vanessa. The final page was a typed schedule of meetings, legal consultations dated over the final months of James's life. 2 dates caught her eye. Appointments made on days Evelyn had been at the hospital, sitting beside him, reading aloud. Except she hadn't been with him the whole time. Vanessa had started taking over afternoon visits, said he needed rest, space. Now Evelyn saw it differently. She closed the folder slowly and leaned back in the chair. Above her, the ceiling fan rotated with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Her mind replayed the last night she and James had spoken about the willover soup and toast in the kitchen. You don't have to worry about anything, Evie, he'd said. I've made sure of that. But now she wasn't sure he had, and she was no longer willing to sit still. She took the folder, wrapped it in a scarf, and placed it inside a locked drawer in the hall closet. Then she walked into the kitchen, picked up the phone, and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. 2 rings. Then the sound of a familiar voice echoed through the phone line, breaking the silence. Daniel Cooper speaking. Evelyn paused for a moment, the words catching in her throat. She hadn't heard his voice in years, but it still held that same grounded calmness that had always reassured her. She swallowed, then whispered, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that had been building inside her. Daniel, it's Evelyn Carter. There was a brief silence on the other end, a quiet beat that felt like an eternity. Evelyn could almost hear the surprise in his breath, the soft rustling of his papers as he processed her name. Then finally he spoke again, his tone warmer, though still edged with curiosity. Evelyn, of course, what's happened? Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice dropping low as she let the words spill out, each one heavier than the last. I found something. I think something's wrong with the will. He didn't ask questions. There was no hesitation, no disbelief. He simply accepted her words, as though he had known all along this moment would come. His response was calm, concise, and to the point. I'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Bring everything. The line went silent as Evelyn slowly lowered the phone from her ear. The quiet hum of the kitchen filled the space around her. She stood there for a moment, letting the words hang in the air, a strange mixture of relief and fear swirling inside her. She wasn't alone anymore, not entirely. But she wasn't certain whether that was a comfort or a burden. She turned off the lights. The house now plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside, casting long shadows on the kitchen walls. She stood still for a long moment, absorbing the silence around her. Daniel Cooper hadn't changed much. Same gray wool coat, same calm, steady presence. They met at a quiet cafe off Elm Street, a place that hadn't been renovated in at least 2 decades. The booths were still wooden, the mugs still chipped, and the coffee still strong. He slid into the seat across from Evelyn, nodding once without small talk. She pulled the manila folder from her bag and placed it on the table between them. He opened it slowly. The moment his eyes fell on James's handwriting, his expression shifted. His lips pressed into a thin, tight line. He read everything in silence: the note, the annotated will, the list of legal appointments. When he finally looked up, there was no pity in his eyes, only focus. It was the kind of look Evelyn had seen countless times before, one that conveyed sharpness, precision, and an unwavering commitment to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. There was no room for sympathy in his demeanor. There was only clarity, a sense of purpose that she desperately needed to hold on to herself. This wasn't a mistake, he said, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. It was a sentence that settled like a stone, sinking deep into Evelyn's chest. She had known something was wrong, but hearing it from Daniel's lips made it undeniable. She couldn't ignore it anymore. "It's more than suspicious," Daniel continued, his voice now calm but cutting. "It's strategic." His words hung in the air, as though they were carving a path through the confusion. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. What he was saying made sense in a way she had been too afraid to acknowledge. The careful, deliberate movements, the controlled distancing. Vanessa had been planning this, and Evelyn had been a silent observer in her own life. Daniel pulled a notebook from his coat pocket, his movements quick and sure, and began writing. The scratching of his pen against paper was the only sound in the room, a rhythmic beat that echoed Evelyn's own pounding heart. With each word, Daniel was outlining the next steps that would lead them to the truth, no matter where it might hide. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a well-thought-out maneuver, a calculated move. Evelyn wasn't sure whether to feel more fearful or relieved. But one thing was clear, she wasn't walking this path alone anymore. He jotted down names law firms Vanessa had referenced, circled dates, drew arrows between the notes and the calendar pages. He tapped twice on one particular line. "The witnesses on the revised will," he said. "Do you recognize the names?" Evelyn shook her head. "I've never met them. James always used people he trusted or neighbor, an old colleague, not strangers." Daniel underlined the names twice. Unfamiliar witnesses, no record of Evelyn's acknowledgement, red markings, and appointments that happened while you were kept away. He leaned back. "This is enough to begin." Quietly. Evelyn nodded. "I don't want to fight," she said. "I want the truth." He gave a small smile. "Then we start with records. I'll file for certified copies of the final will through the county. We'll compare them to your version and the draft. You hold on to everything else. Don't move a paper." Back at home, Evelyn placed the folder inside the family lockbox next to birth certificates and medical records. Then she opened James's calendar, the leather-bound one he always kept near the bookshelf. Flipping through its pages felt intimate, almost invasive. Near the end, she found it, a Tuesday morning, circled twice in pencil. Hal Givens, 9:30 a.m. The name stirred something. Hal had been a tax consultant James once worked with through a nonprofit. Evelyn hadn't seen him in years, but what stood out wasn't the name, it was the secrecy. James had written it down but never told her. She called Daniel. "I found a name," she said. "Hal Givens." Daniel responded instantly. "I'll reach out." The next few days passed in a strange blur. Evelyn went about her routine's groceries, laundry, watering James's orchids. On the surface, everything looked the same. But inside, she was waiting, listening. Then Friday came. Daniel called. "I spoke to Hal," he said. "And you were right." Daniel's voice was calm, but his words cut deep. "Hal remembers James clearly. He said he looked tired, pale, thin, not quite himself, but he was alert. They met for almost an hour." Evelyn held the phone tightly. She was standing by the window, the sky outside washed in winter gray. "What did they talk about?" she asked. "Trust, structuring, beneficiaries." James had questions about long-term protections. He was worried about how the assets would be handled after his death. Evelyn closed her eyes. "He told Hal that Vanessa was helping," Daniel continued. "But Hal said James seemed hesitant. He kept repeating, 'She's just making sure things are clean. She's organized. She means well.' But the way he said it didn't sound confident. It sounded like someone trying to convince himself." Evelyn felt her heart drop. "Hal offered to do an independent review, to draft clear language to ensure you were protected." James agreed at first, but then Daniel paused. Then, a week later, Vanessa called, canceled the meeting, said James didn't need any further services. There was a long silence. "She made that call," Evelyn said flatly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Hal still has the intake notes. They're not legally binding, but they show James had concerns. That matters." Evelyn sat down, the phone still in her hand. That night, She pulled out an old photo album from the hallway shelf, not for nostalgia but for clarity. She flipped through page after page. Christmases, birthdays, dinners with friends. James, always smiling, always present. And Vanessa, always in the background, smiling, helping. Always near the documents, always trusted. At the time, Evelyn thought she was dependable. Now, she saw it differently. She closed the album and stared at the ceiling for a long while. No tears, just a steady knowing. The next morning, she met Daniel again. She brought the calendar, the folder, the printed email from Hal, every thread they had. Daniel spread all the documents across the conference table, each page meticulously organized and neatly stacked. Evelyn looked over the papers, examining each detail from the recorded phone calls to the copies of the wills and the meetings and appointments that had taken place over the past months. Each piece of paper seemed to echo a warning in Evelyn's heart, as the puzzle pieces slowly formed a clearer picture of what had transpired. After reviewing everything carefully, Daniel looked up from the papers and met Evelyn's gaze, his voice calm but serious. "It's time we bring in someone else. Someone who specializes in contested wills, probate fraud." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes steady. She knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud still stirred a sense of unease. Everything had gone too far, and now there was no turning back. She had expected this, but hearing Daniel say those words felt like a confirmation that they were stepping into a territory with no way out. "Who is she?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady despite a hint of hesitation. Every next step could change everything. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Lydia Velasquez. She's quiet, sharp, and experienced. She's handled many cases like this. If anyone can help us, it's Lydia." Evelyn nodded without a second thought. She had come too far to turn back now. The silence in the room felt heavier than ever, but Evelyn could sense something shifting inside her. She was no longer an outsider. She was ready. "Then, let's do it," Evelyn said, her voice firm and decisive. She knew there was no other option. Everything had become clear. "I'm ready." Lydia Velasquez arrived 10 minutes early. She wore a dark gray suit, no jewelry, her silver-streaked hair tied into a clean bun. Everything about her was quiet, deliberate, the kind of woman who didn't speak unless she already knew the answer. Daniel laid out the timeline. Evelyn sat across from them, her hands folded over James's old calendar. Lydia asked questions specific, fast, surgical, no hesitation. She reviewed the handwritten note, the altered will, the canceled appointment with Hal. She paused, only once eat the names of the two witnesses on the revised will. "These names," Lydia said, her voice calm but heavy with the weight of the discovery. "They've come up before, unlicensed notaries, paid to sign without being physically present during the signing process." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to process the gravity of Lydia's words. "Are you saying the signatures?" Lydia interrupted, her gaze steady and unflinching. "I'm saying this wasn't carelessness," she replied, her tone sharp and deliberate. This was constructed. The entire process was meticulously orchestrated to create a false appearance of legitimacy. Someone made sure to manipulate the system to their advantage. This was no mistake. Evelyn absorbed the implications, her mind racing as the reality of the situation began to settle in. She thought back to the meetings, the subtle changes in Vanessa's demeanor, the way everything seemed to slip just out of her grasp. She felt the heat of betrayal rise within her, but she didn't let it show. She kept her focus on Lydia, who now leaned back, her fingers tapping lightly on the table, calculating their next move. "We'll begin by filing a motion to preserve the estate," Lydia continued, her voice unwavering. "If we're granted that motion, Vanessa won't be able to move a dollar without court approval. It will freeze the assets temporarily, putting everything on hold. No more transactions, no more moving funds." Evelyn's thoughts swirled as she absorbed the plan. This wasn't about seeking revenge. Lydia was right. It wasn't about punishing Vanessa, at least not yet. It was about containment. It was about creating a space where the truth could be unearthed, without being further buried beneath layers of deceit. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her chest. "Do it," she said quietly but firmly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. She knew there was no turning back now. The ball was in motion, and it couldn't be stopped. 3 days later, the order came through. The estate was frozen, temporarily. That same afternoon, a cream envelope arrived at Evelyn's door. No return address. Inside was a printed invitation, a private event in honor of Dr. James Carter, hosted by Vanessa. A cocktail reception, a charity auction, 4 days from now. No phone call, no message, just a glossy card like she was being invited to a stranger's gala. Evelyn stared at it for a long time. Evelyn sat in the dim kitchen, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Her thoughts had been racing for hours, and now the decision felt like an unavoidable storm building inside her. She hesitated for a moment, fingers hovering over the phone. This wasn't just a call, it was her chance to reclaim control. Taking a deep breath, she dialed Daniel's number. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "I want to go." After a brief pause, Daniel's calm voice answered, "Where?" "To the meeting," she replied. "But this time, I want to go alone." There was no question from Daniel, just a simple, "I'll be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. Evelyn hung up the phone, her heart pounding, but her resolve solidifying. The house was still but not as suffocating. For the first time in years, she was ready to take charge of her own fate. Alone, but determined, ready for what came next. Saturday arrived, crisp and cold. Evelyn dressed with care navy slacks, a silk blouse James had given her for their anniversary, a thin silver chain, subtle, intentional. The country club was crowded. Evelyn recognized half the guests, former colleagues, board members, people who had once eaten at her dinner table. Vanessa stood in the center, smiling, radiant, surrounded by admiration. When she spotted Evelyn, her expression flickered but only for a second. Evelyn walked past her. At the auction table, items were labeled as James' cherished possessions. A signed baseball, a leather notebook, a first edition novelone Evelyn had given him herself. Her name was nowhere. She touched the book's spine, then stepped back. A man approached her. "It's good to see you, Mrs. Carter. How are you managing the estate?" She blinked. "I'm not." He looked surprised. "Oh, I thought..." "So did I." That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table and wrote down everything she had heard. Every odd phrase, every omission, every assumption. She gave it to Lydia the next morning. "This wasn't just manipulation," Lydia said. "It's premeditated, possibly coercive." Daniel leaned forward. "We'll draft a motion to contest the will." Evelyn nodded. "Do it." Fund 7. The courthouse filing happened on a Monday. Lydia submitted the motion to contest the will on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. The judge accepted it for preliminary hearing. Discovery was approved. That meant one thing. Vanessa's records were no longer protected. Emails, timestamps, metadata, witness lists. Every thread began to unravel. By Thursday, Evelyn received a letter. Vanessa's legal team accused her of interfering with a lawful estate process. They threatened to pursue damages. To Evelyn, it read like fear. Dressed up in expensive paper. She passed it to Lydia without a word. Then something shifted. Ava Kendallone, Vanessa's former assistant, came forward. She described how she had been asked to notarize signatures she didn't witness, how she overheard phrases like "liquidate silently" and "remove co-beneficiary lines." She had kept notes, dates, observations. She didn't want revenge, only truth. Her statement was signed, notarized, entered into record. That was the break they needed. Lydia and Daniel filed to freeze all remaining assets until the hearing. A forensic handwriting expert was brought in to review James's final signatures. Preliminary results showed inconsistencies. The pressure mounted quietly. Then came the moment Evelyn hadn't expected. Vanessa resigned. No admission of guilt, just a two-sentence statement about protecting the foundation's legacy and moving on with grace. But Evelyn knew this wasn't grace. This was retreat. Weeks passed. The board appointed a temporary oversight committee. One of James's closest friends sent Evelyn a letter. "You were right to protect what mattered." That line stayed with her. Evelyn didn't pursue damages. She didn't ask for restitution. What she wanted was already hers. The right to be seen, to be remembered. One morning, she returned to the foundation office for a quiet meeting, not as an executive, not for a title, just to ensure the scholarship program James had started would continue, uncorrupted. No spotlight, no stage, just presence. As she left, she walked past the plaque outside the one James had insisted they keep simple, in honor of those who plant for futures they may never see. Evelyn placed her hand gently over the engraving. James had planted that future, and she had protected it. Spring came slowly that year. The tulips outside the community garden bloomed in quiet defiance of winter's hold. Evelyn received a letter from a young scholar who had once been awarded a grant James helped fund. She wrote carefully, each word purposeful, each sentence a weighty reflection of her journey. Her pen glided over the paper with ease, as though the words had been waiting to escape her for years. "That scholarship changed my life. I'm mentoring girls now just like I was once mentored. Thank you." As she finished the letter, Evelyn paused for a moment, looking down at the neatly written words. She felt a wave of warmth, a mixture of gratitude and clarity. That single scholarship, one small act of kindness and belief, had opened doors for her both in her own life and in the lives of those she now touched. A ripple that had once begun with her now passed forward to others. Evelyn sat back in her chair, her eyes lifting toward the kitchen window. The soft light of the morning spilled across the table, casting long, gentle shadows on the surface. There was a quietness to the room, but it was different now. It no longer felt heavy or oppressive. It was full of meaning, full of memories, and full of possibilities. She had become accustomed to the silence, but today it felt like a companion rather than a burden. She hadn't burned anything down, despite the fires of frustration and bitterness that had once threatened to consume her. She had simply refused to let herself disappear. She refused to be erased, to fade quietly into the background of her own life. She had reclaimed herself in ways she hadn't thought possible. And now, sitting at her kitchen table, Evelyn realized something even more profound. She wasn't just a passive observer anymore. She wasn't merely watching life unfold. No, now she was an active participant, a creator of her own story. She was no longer waiting for someone else to write the ending for her. She was the author of the final chapter. The thought settled in her mind, peaceful yet powerful. She wasn't just witnessing the end of one chapter of her life. She was the one who was choosing how it would end. She was taking control of her narrative. This was her story, her choices, her voice. The silence in the room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the beginning of something new, something hers to shape.